Because I came late. I saved it for you. Better not drink my Coke. And that's my Coke. That's my Coke. Tolly, that's real Coke.
Very long pictures.
Yeah.
Very long quality. A lot of pictures. They should just upload them all now. Very long. Unless we do some tomorrow, I'm not sure how much we'll get.
I'm going to miss the scene on Friday.
The last person. Where you're on Friday.
I've got work.
Who's got
Straight after Shachas.
Lawrence.
Who's Lawrence?
Lawrence Purcell.
Who's that?
What time is it?
Straight after Shachas. Shana Rabba.
What time is the Shachas? The second Shachas? 9:30. It's going to be late to the first one. It's ridiculous. The first one is far too early. The second one is far too late.
I agree with you.
It should be. I said even the second one.
I agree with you. It's on now. There's somebody's on Yehuda. Good morning, Yehuda. Sorry that we're late.
Morning, don't worry.
Are you okay?
Baruch Hashem, all good. Yourself?
I hope you went somewhere excited today. What did you do? Himalayas, probably, no?
No. Nothing so exciting.
I went to Heaton Park, and I think you were the only Yid in Manchester that wasn't there.
No, my wife and kids were there.
Oh, your wife was kids? I didn't see. Oh, I said to you, you were the only one up there. It was also quite chilly. I found it very chilly. I was there for about an hour. It wasn't long enough. We're up to Daf Nuntes Amud Aleph, top of the page. We've got a lot to do, so we'll see. The Mishnah says. The Mishnah says that if you've got a Rubit Chumin, it's the last Mishnah we did. Then what happens if somebody puts markers far, another person, and another marker is much nearer? So which marker do you go for? Which one are you allowed to go to? If you've got some markers saying to the Eiruvin Chumin is very good. Why? Safek Rabbanan L'Kula. There's a very, very interesting mitzvah on this Gemara. Very interesting mitzvah. I'm not even nervous to mention it, but you should just be aware of it. This asks an obvious question. What's this obvious question is? Why be makel? Take out your tape measure and start again. Right? I say to you, go there. You say go there. There's one marker there.
You already realize I know.
Okay, so the Mishnah does not say that. Mishnah doesn't say read this Shabbos. Mishnah say you can rely on it. That's it.
When does the measurement have to be signed? When you sit down now, do you have to do it before Shabbos?
No. You can find out on Shabbos. You're walking on Shabbos and you see two signposts. I always say the thing that you can't. He says because it's a lot of effort. What means it's a lot of effort? So what? He says by Safek D'Rabbanan, when it's a lot of effort, you do not need to find out. You can be say Safek D'Rabbanan L'Kula. Can you imagine? He says the extra clear. Safek D'Rabbanan L'Kula is only when it's a genuine Safek. It's Machloek, it's a Safek. But let's, for example, I say to you, I just don't know. I've never bothered looking inside the Mishnah book. I'm allowed Safek D'Rabbanan L'Kula, of course not. Safek D'Rabbanan is when you've got a genuine Safek. But he says, so over here, it's not a genuine Safek. Because over here, all you need to do is go and take out your tape measure. Answers the mitzvah that since it's a lot of effort, it's considered a genuine Safek. And I'll tell you where it comes up. And again, I'm nervous to say it, is that if you've got a suit which has got a Safek shatness, and the shatness only D'Rabbanan, which most times it often is, then you've got this mitzvah to rely on it. Because at the end of the day, it's Safek D'Rabbanan L'Kula. But you should know, I do check everything, but there are those who say that it's not necessary. What? It's a very expensive house, I know. So anyway, they say to it, you should look, if ever you want to say to somebody says to you, why are you not bothering? You say to him, look at the mitzvah and aim definitely test, because it's of ancient logic, if you think about it. It's really, somebody says, I don't know. Oh, it's after I'm allowed to do it. No, you're not. Go and look it up in the sefer, find out that, and then you think, if it's a machlek, so for there was always answer to the mitzvah over here, a lot of effort. So it says the Mishnah. I remember one time I went to do it. I went 3 times to shut this place, and every time it was closed, and then he charged me a lot of money. And I was thinking to myself, all of this, and they say that the whole chiyuv is because it's easy to check. That's the Lashon of them. Anyway, says the Gemara, it's very strange Lashon Gemara. The Gemara says like this. The Gemara says that you can medayek only to the longer one, not to the shorter one. Let's say, for example, let's say this is the town. Yeah, my Gemara is the town. So east got a long way. To the west, it's very short. So the Mishnah says you can be make or go to the long, which the Gemara at this stage understands only to the longer one. You can't rely on the shorter one. It doesn't make any sense. Why in the world would you not be able to? As well, we don't mean that only the long one, not the short one. We mean that you can also rely on the long one. This Rosh explains a bit of extra, very nice point. That if you've got one person long, one person short, let's say, look short. So you might say to yourself, well, the person who did it short obviously doesn't know how to count. So therefore, maybe I shouldn't rely on him at all, and I can't walk at all until I measured myself. He says, well, no, you're allowed to rely on the short, even though you know he's wrong, and still go further as if it's long. That's what he says. Okay. The Mishnah seems to repeat itself. So normally that's exactly the same statement. Again, very similar. Before we were talking about you've got two markers, one's long, one's short. Here we've got two Talmidei Chachamim. One Talmid Chacham says to you, you're allowed to go up to that tree. And the other says, no, you're only allowed to go up to the lake. So you got, what do you do? What would you pass him? Oh, why? Because of the Abban and the Kula. It's very interesting. It was Yehuda Steinberg to say, very nice sefer if you ever have time. And he writes, what happens if the one who says L'chumma is a bigger Talmid Chacham? What would you say?
I was going to say, what happens if you got that?
No.
The other guy's not
No, he said both. He says doesn't matter. Again, this all reminds of this Ritva that the Ritva says that you can make with the thing. Well, again, what did we say? Let's get it clear. That if you got two Talmidei Chachamim, one's a huge Talmid Chacham, he's machmir. One's a not so Talmid Chacham, it's meiko. You go to the meiko. Says more Omar Abai. As long as he's doing more than the diagonal of the city. The Rashi says about this Gemara, I don't really understand it. Something like Lashon. Libim gamgim belashon. I'm not convinced of it. But what he explains, and this is how they explain it. Oh, we did a few pictures. Let's get back into the pictures. There's loads of pictures today. I should really put a marker or something. So Rashi said, actually, I must admit that the picture over here, I always look a bit in the article, and I saw the article, I can have a slightly better picture. It's picture Shin Samach Vov, if you got it, and then Shin Samach Zayin. And they're quite mathematical. The idea being, Shin Samach Vov, Shin Samach Zayin. Rashi says like this. If the discrepancy between the two, again, I say, I'm machmir. I say, I can only go to the lake. You say, no, you go much further, you can go all the way to the lamppost. Right? So the halacha is, we can rely on you. Even though you're being more maker. Says Abaya, as long as the difference between the two of us is not more than the diagonal of the city. Says, that's what I mean, diagonal of the city. If you remember, we explained that in each direction, you're allowed to go 2,000 amas. Oh. So the difference between us is only 0.4 of the city. Then we explain 0.4 of the tchum, 0.4 of the 2,000 amas. So if you look at the picture, they say it's, yeah, you would say so. It's not. It is 0.4 minus 0.4 less of 2,000. Very good. You're quick on it. Of 2,000, meaning if it's 1,428. If you say 1,428 and I say 2,000, so we can understand that you were working with that. You went to the diagonal as if it's straight, and you only came to 1,428 because you were machmir as if it's 2,000, and you went in at the diagonal because you were scared. You didn't know this halacha that the diagonal allowed extra. So way off. Okay, let's leave the numbers out of it again. If the difference between us could be interpreted as the difference is because you are saying one diagonal, I'm saying a different diagonal, that's okay. But if it's the difference is even more than that, then we have to start from scratch. Why? Because obviously something has gone wrong. That's what the Gemara is saying over here. If you look at Shin Samach Vav and Shin Samach Zayin, it shows you the picture. Look at the picture of Shin Samach Zayin. If you look at the picture of Shin Samach Zayin, the number base is not Baki, and the number Aleph is Baki. The one who was Baki made a whole square of 2,000 amas. The one who wasn't Baki went and counted 2,000 amas on the diagonal line as well. Since he counted 2,000 amas on the diagonal line, he only allowed you 1,428. Have you got it? So therefore, he made that mistake. If the mistake is more than that, that's right.
Really could have gone longer.
Exactly. Then we can say, but otherwise you can't. Says the Mishnah, quotes the Mishnah again. They only said to be machmir, not to be maker. That means the Chachamim only told us to be maker by over tchum, not to be machmir. But Tanya Lamu Chachamim they only said to be machmir, not to be maker. It's a contradiction to our Mishnah. Our Mishnah says that we always want you to be maker. Here it says he always wants you to be machmir. Meaning like this. The etzem din of walking out of the tchum, is that a chumrah or kula? It's a chumrah. Because Minato, you're allowed to walk out of the tchum. So the etzem halacha of the Ruvei Tchumin is a chumrah. But when they established the halacha of Ruvei Tchumin, they said, always be meikol. Let's get it clear. The more in our Mishnah says is they said by Ruvei Tchumin, just be meikol. Furthermore, what do you mean? The Brisa says by Ruvei Tchumin, just be machmin. It's a contradiction. And it's like this. The essence of Ruvei Tchumin is a chumrah. Because at the end of the day, in HaTorah, you could just walk as far as you want. Can you walk as far as you want? There's a shittas Rabbi Akiva, you're not allowed to walk more than 12 mil, 24 kilometers on Shabbos. You have to be careful with such things. Even with a tchum, even with the thing. But nice, no, it's machlekes. We showed you whether we passed like Rabbi Akiva, and it's very, very rare that a person should walk 24 kilometers out of the city. But generally speaking, let's say we do pass like Akiva or not, the halach is minato allowed to walk. So therefore, the essence of Ruvei Tchumin is a kula. Sorry, a chumah. So it's a chum. But once they established it, they said, be makel as you want. So therefore, it's not a contradiction. Our Mishnah is saying to you that never said Ruvei Tchumin, just be makel over Tchumin. The Brisa is saying, but the essence of the halacha of Ruvei Tchumin was a chumrah. Says the Mishnah. The Mishnah is very strange. Is that the Mishnah is when they talk about this whole sukkah, this whole period, we're discussing a Ruvei Tchumin. At the beginning of the Masechta, we always talk about which kind of Eruv? Ruvei Chatzeros. We left the top of Ruvei Chatzeros, went to Ruvei Tchumin. This Mishnah, and later we're going to go back to Ruvei Tchumin. This Mishnah is completely out of place, and many of the Mephoshim will ask the question: why in the world in the period of Ruvei Tchumin do have a Mishnah about Ruvei Chatzeros? The Tiferes Yisrael answers because in the last Mishnah we learned that an Eved or a Shivcha is believed regarding Ruvei Tchumin. And it says regarding this Mishnah as well, an Eved and a Shivcha is believed. So now we're going back to Ruvei Chatzeros. What is a Ruvei Chatzeros? The Ruvei Chatzeros basically is min HaTorah. If I have my own private property and you have your private property and it's adjacent, I'm allowed to carry from mine to yours. Why? So and if, for example, all of us own a property around a certain courtyard, we're all allowed to carry from our house into the chotzer, from the chotzer into the mavoi, and back into the chotzer, and back to the house, because it's all shusayochet. Midrabanan they forbade it because it looks like you're carrying from shusayochet to shusayochet. They allowed it under certain circumstances. How did they allow it? If you make an eruv chatzeros is for chotzer, shituf mevois is for mavoi. There is a halacha which we once mentioned before. There's a city shel rabim. One cannot make an eruv in a city shel rabim. And there's a machlokes in the Mephoshim what is considered il shel rabim. I'm only going to say this once. Afterwards, we're always going to stick to Rashi. Rashi says il shel rabim, no, because it gets confusing if every time we go through it. Rashi says il shel rabim is a city that 600,000 people live inside it. Tosa says il shel rabim is a city which belongs to the public. Il shel yochid is a privately owned city. According to Rashi, il shel yochid is anything which owns less than. Other Rishonim say Il Shel Rabim is a city which has 600,000 people using one road. Il Shel Yochid is where there's not a single road which 600,000 people use. We'll keep to Rashi. According to Rashi, Il Shel Rabim is a city of 600,000 people. Meaning, says Rashi, even if there's not a single road that 600,000 people use, because at the end of the day you've got a city which has 10 roads, and each road only 100,000 people use. So collectively in the city, there's 600,000 people. Whatever Il Shel Rabim is, the fact is Chazal did not want in the Il Shel Rabim that people should make an eruv throughout the entire city. Why not? Because if we allow people to use the entire city of Il Shel Rabim to make an eruv, people will forget that you can't make an eruv in a public domain. They'll think to yourselves, you can also make an eruv. So for in a city which has 600,000 people, you can't make an eruv throughout the city. You have to leave a small area which you don't use for the eruv. That is the basic halach of our Mishnah. The Mishnah also explains to us what happens if the city changes. Now here we have an interesting halacha where it does not depend on the status of the city now, but it depends on the status of the city as it was. And the Meiri explains, it's very logical, that over here it's only exerted of Rabbanon. That people will think that this city, you're doing an eruv, you're allowed to do an eruv Rishus Rabim. So if people will consider it a very big city, the fact that now you know that it's become a very small city, people are used to the idea it's a big city. And vice versa. If it's a small city and more people came to live there, people look at it as a small city. So therefore, it depends on what it used to be. What? Yes, I hear. Now it's more. I hear. Okay, we'll see. The Gemara does cut. Il Shel Yochid, a city according to Rashi which has less than 600,000 people. According to Tosos, it belongs to one person. But now since Shel Rabim became Shel Rabim, Ma'alvin Yeskula. You're allowed to do Eiruvin throughout the city. Why? Because people remember it as Il Shel Yochid. You can't do an Eruv. Why? Even though now it's Shalochit, people know it as being a big city. The only way to do it is to make it an area which is not part of the Eruv. You have to have at least 50 people, 50 inhabitants, who will not be part of the Eruv. You have to make an area part of it, which is not part of the Eruv. How big does the area have to be? Like a city called Chadosha, and the word Chadosha comes from a pasuk in Yeshua, where they had a city which was actually called Chadosha. It's not a new city. It's literally a city called Chadosha, which has 50 people. So therefore, if you got an area, then people always remember you can't carry there. By remembering you can't carry there, they'll remember the halachas of Eiruvin Rishus Rabim. It's just by population, 50 inhabitants. Much less. You only have to have 3 chatzeros, 3 courtyards, and each one has to have 2 houses. Okay. Says the Gemara, the Gemara asks the Shaila, what do we mean a city which was individual and became a public place? Now, the Gemara could have just said any city, right? I remember when we were young, we used to talk about Manchester as a small town. Everybody greeted each other, everybody knew each other. I remember I used to go to swimming in Eiruvin Moss, in the early swimming. I don't know if you ever had the experience. You're all too young probably, but and they'd all sit there talking, questioning about the fact that these youngsters come in and they don't know anybody and they don't not part of the Kehillah, they don't pay Kehillah Jews and all the rest. There used to be Manchester, people felt that they were part of Kehillah. Mr. Silverstone, did you remember him? The short one, Harry, used to swim very, very well. I remember he used to telling me off that you're not swimming in the correct strokes. Your grandfather, yes, Mr. Cope, yes, I remember him as well. Anyway, so what happened was, the Gemara could have answered Manchester. The Gemara doesn't. The Gemara says, Amar Yehuda going Diskuter to Reish Kelusa. What? Diskuter just means a city. The Reish Kelusa of the Reish Kelusa. Reish Kelusa is the exilarch, it's the person in charge of the Reish Kelusa. Now, why did you choose that city? Why? If the reason you chose that city is because everybody comes to the Reish Kelusa regularly, so therefore everybody talks to each other and they remind each other of the halachas. Now, why would they all come to the Reish Kelusa? Actually, there's 2 very interesting reasons why you go to the Reish Kelusa. Rashi says that they would go to get smicha. Now, the Rishonim will say it doesn't mean literally smicha. Smicha had long been cancelled, unfortunately, before that. It means permission to take a shtela. That was one reason the Reish Kelusa. And another reason was lahatir b'choros. There was a special gezerah to Rabbanan, actually mentioned it recently. For b'chor to be eaten outside Beis Hamikdash has to have a mum. We're concerned that Kohanim would just make mummim without permission. So therefore, what would happen is you'd have to get special permission from the Reish Kelusa to be somebody that can pass regarding these things. So the Gemara hadn't understood the reason we talk about the Reish Kelusa is because it's a place where people meet up. Since they meet up, so therefore it's a place where people remember the halachas. It says, well, every Shabbos morning, everybody meets each other. It says Rashi to go to hear the drasha. It says the Ritvah to go to shul. Shabbos morning is a time when people meet up. Since it's a time that people meet up, so therefore that is the time that you don't need that city. Anyway, Nachman going to discuss it to Natuzia. Natuzia was the name of a person. And again, over here we have 2 explanations very briefly. Rashi says it just means any city. Like saying there's an expression, not Prinyam, when you're like Jack City. I mean anybody, any city. The Ritvah says no, it has to be a city which belongs to an individual, like you call it that investment town. Like Canadians don't really have towns that belong to people, but you have areas like Mayfair Estates or something.
Las Vegas.
No, that doesn't belong to a person, does it?
Each bit belongs to someone.
Yes?
Each hotel, yeah. There's large areas.
Large areas, okay.
Or groups.
Okay. So the Ma'aseh the Gemara establishes any city which is Shalach Shel Rabim is considered a city of Yochid. Told Rabban, Il Shalach Shel Rabim. Shel Rabim reverse b'seicha. You go with Shel Rabim going through it. Now, till now we're discussing the Ruve Chatzeros from one angle. That is, if there's too many people, we don't want you to do an Eruv for the whole city. People forget it. Now we're discussing another problem. Is that when you've got to Rishus Rabim, you can't do an Eruv in Rishus Rabim. So what do? Going back to what we've had a long time. So let's just look at the pictures for 1 second. We've had this so many times already in the past. What you do is you do a lechi on one side and a kura on the other. That is pictures Shin Ayin and Shin Ayin Aleph. So a lechi is a tiny little post at each end. A kura is a beam on each end. And then what happens is, by doing that, it's a Rishus Rabbim. It's actually could die a little bit to look at this picture if you've got the ability, because this is how the cities used to look like in the olden days. Just be aware. You would have one entrance at one end of the city, one entrance to the other city, and then a main throughway going through the entire city. Off the main throughway, you would have lots of little cul-de-sacs. Off every cul-de-sac, you'd have lots of courtyards. So you'd have a number of families per courtyard, a number of courtyards per cul-de-sac. Like that's right, that's the cul-de-sac was a movie, and the number of movies per Rishus Rabbim. That was the. Whenever we want to talk about a city, that's what the city looked like. If you think about it, it's quite organized. It'd be very nice if all our cities look like that, right? You come in, and you go out, and then you go in. If you want to go to a certain movie, you go in. You go to the left. You've got different movies. So. Yeah, but that goes through it a little bit, where you've got roads coming off, that each road's got a few houses. Yeah, okay. Yeah, cities were much, much, much smaller, yes. Right. So, you're not allowed to make an eruv for half a city. More later, we'll describe this in detail. Wait to them. Either you make an eruv for the entire city, or movi for the atzmoi, or each movi by itself. You can't do half a city. Either you do an eruv for the entire city, or each particular cul-de-sac, each particular movi by itself. If you belong to the public, remains the public, top of Montesson ways, it's only got one entrance. That means not like the Rishus Rabbim I just showed you, where you've got two entrances to the Rishus Rabbim, one from one end, one from the other. It's only got one entrance, right? You come into the Rishus Rabbim, so if you happen to live right to the end of it, it's quite difficult. Every time you come into the city, you have to go in through one entrance, go all the way to the end, and go right there. It's only got one entrance. Then the Avin is Kula, you're allowed to make an eruv of the whole thing. And then again, we'll discuss later why that should be. Says the Gemara, Man Tanad Mal Rishus Rabbim. One problem over here is we talk about real Rishus Rabbim, and we said, how did you make an eruv? If you looked at the picture, the eruv was quite a simple eruv. You did a kura at one end, or kura on the other, or lechi on the other side. Now that is a very, very big chiddush. How can you do that? Says the Gemara, who says that you're allowed to do such a thing? Says the Gemara, does anybody remember the very big chiddush of Rabbi Yehuda? What's chiddush of Rabbi Yehuda? Without looking inside, what's the chiddush of Rabbi Yehuda? If you've got two walls, then in Rishus Rabbim, then what?
Then
you can carry on between that two. And therefore, you only need a midah. But I'm going to say it again because it's very, very important. We know we need three walls. But in my say it's very. The big shaila b'chukos abiyud and achom is what's considered Rishus Rabbim, what's considered Rishus Yachid. According to Rabbi Yehuda, as long as something's got two walls, min haTorah, it's now Rishus Yachid. Midrabon, it's not. You have to do something that people should know that it's different. So you can put a beam or a post, and that's good enough. According to the Chachamim, no. Unless it has three proper walls, it's considered a Rishus Rabbim. Once it's got three proper walls, then you need to add another wall to make it mutter midrabon. So again, according to Rabbi Yehuda, two proper walls and a lechi or a kura is enough. According to Chachamim, you need three proper walls. So we said many times this example. According to Rabbi Yehuda, along the M62, there's a bridge. It goes up and across. You've got two walls. According to Rabbi Yehuda, when you're underneath the bridge, what are you in? It's just a yachid. So you're allowed to carry. So what happens, for example, if you own a property on both sides of Berenyou Road, you'll be allowed to throw across, and you'd be allowed to carry across min haTorah. On midrabanon, you'd have to make a simon. So what would you do? You put a little post outside one of your doors, and then that way you'd be allowed to carry across the Berenyou Road. The Gemara says, "The tell yes, the person has two houses, not just by a bridge, but two houses on two sides of Rishus Rabbim. So this brayso that said that you're allowed to make an eruv of Rishus Rabbim in such a way holds like Rabbi Yehuda, that a Rishus Rabbim that's a throughway through an entire city. According to Rabbi Yehuda, what is this Rishus Rabbim? What halach status does it have? Why? Because since you've got cul-de-sacs coming off, the cul-de-sacs themselves would be walls. If you look at that picture, what happens is most of the time, look at picture Shin Ayin, right? Or even Shin Ayin Aleph. Most of the time you've got walls along. Since most of it is walled, that Rishus Rabbim is considered Rishus Yachid. So therefore, you want to make it mutter to carry, you just need to do a lechir koyim. Olama. You can't do an Erev halfway. I'm going to go a little bit outside and then inside. So again, you've got to be here. Picture if you could upload it Shin Ein Vav and Shin Ein Zayin. It's over the page. So Shin Ein Vav and Shin Ein Zayin. You're not allowed to make an Erev Shin Ein. You can't make an Erev like Shin Ein Vav, but Shin Ein Zayin you can. Now, why would there be a difference? Why is Shin Ein Vav forbidden and Shin Ein Zayin permitted? What?
It's where the road is.
It's much more clearly marked, I hear.
Easy to know which way.
But there's another reason. If you look at the pictures,
There's two walls.
no, Shin Ein Vav, you're not allowed to make such an Eruv. Shin Ein Zayin, you're allowed to. Why would that be? The reason is as follows. No, it's got to a different problem. The halacha is, look at just picture very, very briefly, Shin Ein Ches. Can you upload Shin Ein Ches, Dolly? I upload Shin Ein Ches for a second. This is a very famous picture. We've had it before, but it's very sadistic one. Shin Ein Ches. Just look at picture Shin Ein Ches for a minute. Imagine in Shin Ein Ches, the inner one would make an Eruv and the outer one would make an Eruv, right? Would you allow people in the outer one to carry into the Chotzer? The answer is no. It's machlokas later, but we pass not. Why not? What's wrong with carrying in the outer one? The answer is that the inner people can never get to the Mavui unless they trespass. I shouldn't say trespass. They have a right of way through the outer one. And since each Chotzer made an Eruv on its own, so therefore their right of way gives them a tiny bit of ownership in that Chotzer. So therefore, how can they make an Eruv? The people in the inside were never included. If they all make an Eruv together, Matov and Manoim, but they never made an Eruv together. Regarding the Rishus Rabbim, if you look at it like this, in Shin Ein Vav, everybody is going to walk down the Rishus Rabbim, both people on the right and people on the left, in Shin Ein Vav. So therefore, how can you make an Eruv of half the Rishus Rabbim? In the end of the day, you're including areas both of us are going to go through. So you can't make an Eruv. Masha'inkin, if you do Shin Ein Zayin, all you do is like this, you'll split the town down the middle, and you'll tell those that did the Eruv, the darkened area, will go out of that entrance. The people of the other people go out the other entrance. So therefore, nobody ever actually has to trespass through. The people that didn't do the Eruv, which is in this particular picture, light colored, they won't go through. They go out the other way. Masha'inkin.
The other way around,
They have to go through Rishus Rabbim. So let's see inside. Why? Says Kiva says it's also. So the Gemara says, according to Rabbi Akiva, it forbids. So you see that Rabbi Akiva says that the Gemara in the haven't understood that the people who have not done an Eruv, in the end of the day, they won't listen to you not to come out of this rishus. They will say, sometimes I want to go to the east, sometimes I want to go to the west, and if sometimes I won't go through there, and Afro became it works. So the Gemara says, Afilu Teimu Rabbi Akiva, there's absolutely no other way for it to go out. Since there's absolutely no other way for them to get to the cul-de-sac, therefore they have a right of way, and therefore they forbid it. They can go out one entrance, they go out the other entrance, and therefore it's not a problem. According to our proper second Mishnah, you're not allowed to do an Eruv of either direction. Not lengthways and not widthways. Why? Because then the people can get through. It says, well, it's only according to Akiva, according to Chamim, we should be okay. Why can't you do it? Can close the door. Can you stop the Rishus for going in through? Here, let's go through it a little bit inside. Regarding picture Shin Ein Ches, we have a machlokes Tanoim b'Chachamim Rabbi Akiva as to whether the Chotzer Chitzoina are allowed to make an Eruv or not. It's a machlokes Tanoim. Rabbi Akiva says that they're not allowed to. The Chachamim say they are allowed to. Regarding Shin Ein Zayin, when you make an Eruv to the half, we have a machlokes in the Gemara, two lishnos, if you're allowed to make an Eruv or not. The Gemara tries twice to say, first time, that the one who forbids it in Shin Ein Zayin fits in according to the man and forbids it there. And then the Gemara later says, one who permits it there must hold it's permitted there. What the Gemara says is that the two questions have nothing to do with each other. Why not? Because in one way, the pictures of the two chatzeros is more chomo, and in one way it's more kuladik. In one way it's more stringent, one more kuladik. In one way it's more chomo, in the sense that there's no way for the chotza pnimis to get out except through the chotza chitzonos. They have absolutely no other way to get through. Since they have absolutely no other way to get through, so therefore they have a complete right of way. So therefore, obviously, you need to include them in there. If you don't include them in the Eiruvin, how could you make it there without including them? So therefore, we can't compare that to Shina and Zayin, where they've got an option to leave one way, they've got an option to leave the other way. So you can't compare. There, it is much better in the sense that they can choose the other way. And none of this is worse. It's slightly different. Why? There, it's a private property. And the private property dictates that if they wanted to, from an halachic point of view, they could lock the door between the two chatzeros. And what would happen is that people would not be able to get out for that Shabbos because it's outside of private property. Even if, let's say, for example, I live on King's Road, I live towards closer to Perigny. Let's say somebody says to me closer to Perigny, I don't understand. You want to walk to Perigny, don't go past my house. Only go past from your house onwards. You can't do anything about it. What do you mean? It's a public throughway. I'm allowed to walk all the way towards Perigny, then I walk back to Perigny. You're allowed to go anywhere you want. By this one, they can say, no, we're locking the door, we're not letting people through. So the Gemara says the machlokes of Akiva and the Chachamim as to whether you're allowed to do an Eruv of just the Chitzona without the Pnimis has nothing to do with the machlokes, the two lishnos over here. We the Ma'aser Paskan that you can do an Eruv lerochbam, not le'olkom. The Gabi here we're machmir that you can't do an Eruv the Chitzona without the Pnimis. We pass like a people. Okay, the world comes to it more in a later period. Okay, the Vaisa says you could either make an Eruv throughout the entire city or each Movi by itself. And we explained the problem of making an Eruv in half a city. What's the problem? The problem is that the people who haven't been included in Eruv are going to be walking through the people who have made an Eruv, and they were never included in the Eruv, and they'll walk through, and they'll say to themselves, we're entitled to go through, and since we're entitled to go through, they'll spoil the Eruv for everybody else. If that's the case, why do you forbid it when it's half-half? The Osiyah Dodi, they forbid each other. If you look at the Movi over here, in picture, let's say Shinayin or any of them, if you make an Eruv for each Movi by itself, the reality is that each person is allowed to come into the other person's Movi. That means like this, we look at it as a one town. By each person splitting up and making his own Eruv, he's showing that he's not allowing other people. So it's like, for example, if we share property, let's say all of us live around one courtyard, and I say nobody's allowed to go into my house. So then what happens is that the rest of you can't make an Eruv without me doing bits of the shus, etc. Why? Because I'm showing that I'm makbid. The same thing, if one Movi makes an Eruv, he's showing that he's makbid on the rest of the town. Answers the Gemara. When you made a dako. The Gemara explains, Rashi explains, dako means a small gateway. In the picture Shina and Tess, it's there, and it's very hard to see it, but if you look carefully at the entrance of every Mavui, there's a whole doorpost and an entranceway, an entire entranceway. By making an entranceway, there's a word for it, to cut off yourself from the rest of the separate cessation or something. No, but there's a word for our country when it comes away from another country. What? No, the annex is the opposite. Annex is when you join something, no?
Yeah, annexing off. Annexing off.
No.
Annex to join.
Annex to join.
Cessation.
Cessation or something. There's a word for it. Anyway, so by putting this doorway, this entranceway up, what they're doing is we're saying we have nothing to do with the town. Since we have nothing to do with the town, we can make an Eruv on our own. If you do it to your chotzer, let's say we all of us own our own garden, and now we've got from the garden there's a courtyard. So what happens? You can't do an Eruv together. But if I make a gateway to my garden, so then I can make an Eruv by myself, and you can make an Eruv by yourself, and the gateway works. A gateway shows that he has nothing to do with the rest of the area, and he can make his own Eruv. Says the Gemara. Hoysa shel Rabbi hichul. Says Rabbi Zera over the Moset to be Abchia. Rabbi Zera made an Eruv for the town of Abchia, but without leaving anything over. He did not leave anything over. Can you imagine? He did the Eruv for a whole town. He didn't leave over. Was it a big town or small town? Oh, if we're doing a small town, then he wouldn't have done anything wrong, and the moment needs to say it. That's right, that's your question. But you're right. Had it been a small town, it'd be Matov and it'd be wonderful. But what did he do? He did it to a very, very big town, which we passed it now. Mishnah has to leave some over. Why did he do that? The old people in that town, the Barasi did it. But I said to myself, why did they do it? That's the Shirabimi. That the reason why it's okay is because it originally was a small town, and we passed the small town and became a big town. You're allowed to do the whole city, because since everybody remembers it as being a small town, so therefore what happens is, it's considered a small town. So therefore I continued that tradition, that's a small town, and I didn't know to the whole town. A different story. I never realized. If you look at the picture, Shin Pei Base, you can upload it, Shin Pei Base. What happened was like this. You could actually, if you could upload Shin Pei Aleph at the same time, because Shin Pei Aleph, we talked about it, but didn't have a short picture. Here you've got somebody in Shin Pei Aleph, let's look at it for a second. You've got everybody opens up to a mavui, but one people made a small gateway to his garden. So then what happens is, he's not included in the mavui, it doesn't matter, it doesn't ask for the mavui, right? If, for example, let's say a few of us live, it's a proper halacha, it comes out to a house, let's say, for example, we all lived in the cul-de-sac. Okuva Road, very good. We all live on Okuva Road. Quite nice houses there, we surely don't go Okuva Road. So what happens is, and then somebody wants to make an ear of the whole Okuva Road. But my garden, I don't want to. I want to be a dafkidik, I don't want to. So if I haven't made a gateway to my garden, they can't. They will not be able to. If I make that little gateway, if you look at it in Shin Pei Aleph, then everybody else can make a mobile without me. Now, Shin Pei Base is what really we're trying to come on to. It's like this. He made an Eruv for the entire city without doing a Shiur. He thought the reason was because it's a small city, but it wasn't a small city. Really, what was it? It was a big city. But the reason why it was okay was because it was a city without a proper throughway. There used to be a big pile of rubbish. And the Rishonim say, if you look at this pile of rubbish, it didn't really draw it so well. If you look at the pile of rubbish, it was a pile of rubbish which was 10 tefachim high. So it was like a wall, like a big dump. So therefore, it blocked off the city. Since it blocked off the city, it was no longer a city which has Rosh Hashanah going through it. And then you are allowed to do a mavui through the whole thing. And that's why he allowed it. And now that the ashpos cleared away, was he allowed to make an eruv throughout the city? No. And he made a mistake. I never realized. Now look at this picture of Shin Pei Gimel for a moment. Shin Pei Gimel is a city which has got to Rosh Hashanah, which goes through it. Can you see? The city goes through it. One entrance is a proper entrance. The other side, have you put up Shin Pei Gimel? You put up Shin Pei Aleph, Shin Pei Beis, Shin Pei Gimel? Right. Right. If you look very carefully, there's a ladder there. Now, what would you say regarding a ladder? On one hand, would you call a ladder Rosh Hashanah? Why? No, I'm asking you, is a ladder considered a ladder over a wall? Would you consider that a wall? Or you consider it an entranceway? You hear the shaila? Okay, so what do you hear with the shaila? You've got an entranceway at one end. The other end, you've got a wall. But there's a ladder placed against the wall all the time. Would you consider that a wall or an entranceway? You consider that a wall. You consider it a wall. You all agree?
I'm going to say entranceway because everyone else is saying wall.
It's a machlokes to the Gemara. Do you know what the Gemara Pascha is very interesting? That we Pascha, you can choose lekula, whichever one you prefer. If you prefer it to be a wall, lekula, where would it be a kula? If it's a wall, then you can do an eruv of the whole thing. Very good. I will find the cases where it's lekula to make it an entranceway. And the logic is quite obvious. You may convince that it's a wall. I'm not sure. At the end of the day, it's a throughway. Everything goes up. When you go walk in the countryside and have a style, would you consider that a private place? Yes. I don't have the cliff so much. Well, I'm not sure what. When you go to walk in the countryside, they have what's these styles where you climb up it. Country styles. There's words right.
You have to climb over it to get.
That's right. You have them through loads of farmland, right? Go up, right.
You struggle with the buggy, getting the buggy over.
That's right. The buggy is always.
Does it not make a difference how steep it is?
I'll pick it up later. Now, what happens if you have loads of ladders? Then then you've got a question of that's a poet's mobile image. Can you imagine such a thing? The words clear such a shayla. Sure. Let's go inside. Boim ne Rabbi Barada Harpano from Harpano. That's the name of his town. Mirab Sulam Ikam Pesach Ikam now. Omale Hochim Rav Sulam to us Pesach Olav. I may say I tell you the Rav didn't agree with you, and he said that's an entrance way. Oh, Omale Nachmele Tetzisulei. Oh, Nachmele said don't listen to him. Hochim Avadam Rav Sulam to us Pesach Olav to us Bechitz Olav. It's got both. To us Bechitz Olav could the Omon over here when you want it to be a block. It's got a block. To us Pesach Olav. The Sulish bin Shtei Chatzos. We've discussed this before. And actually, I remember it once happening. My father wanted to make a kiddush. My brother's bar mitzvah. And next door is his likeness. 26 Austin Road.
Make kiddush nowadays.
The olden days. Not before that. Now the problem is, he wants to make the men in one, the ladies another. Done it a few times. And what happens is like this. There is no gateway between the two gardens. Oh, we don't have panel, we have hedges. It's not so straightforward. So now, let's get that halachas clear. If I've got my back garden and your back garden, I'm not allowed to carry from mine to yours and yours to mine. You're not allowed to carry. Even if we try and make an Eruv together. Why can't we make an Eruv together? Can't access it. Oh, we can over the hedge. That does not call the access. You have to have a doorway. So what you have to do is lift a paddle. Everybody, when it came to these gardens, lifted paddles all over the place. So the Gemara says over here, you could do a different thing. What you could do is just place a ladder on each side. You place a ladder on each side, and then you've got an entrance way.
You don't need to use the ladder to pass things over.
Oh, very good.
Pass things over.
That's right. Once you've got the ladder there, you don't need to climb up the ladder. Oh, if you take away the panel, you need a source of Pesach. A ladder is a Pesach. Right? Oh, as long as it can be possibly to be open. Can it be open? Oh. So again, what's Echad Ba'av, what's Shnai Ba'av? Did Rav Nachman say so? We have to understand the time. So this is another picture. This is a more complicated picture. So yeah, very lots of pictures. Picture. Oh, yeah. Sorry. Oh, yeah. By the way, if you want to look at it, Shin Pei Dalet. You put a ladder there. By putting a ladder, they can make an air between the two corners because you see they can't get through from one to the other. So they put a ladder there. Now they're allowed to carry over the fence. Shin Pei Dalet. It's good to put up Shin Pei Dalet as well. Now here we're talking about Shin Pei Hei. Shin Pei Hei. What happened was not such a brilliant picture, I must admit. There was a better picture elsewhere. The arts code got a better picture. I know. Okay. Shin Pei Hei. What happened was like this. If you could see the arts code, I would have done a better job. Very, very briefly. Very quickly. What happened was you've got an upstairs, you've got a downstairs, and they never made an air between the two. So, if they made a gateway, it doesn't answer. Now the question is, why does it answer? You just said that a ladder can be a block. If it's a block, it's not a gateway. We're talking about where the upstairs is not 10 tefachim high. Since it's not 10 tefachim high, it's not considered a separate reshus. It's only if there's a 10 tefachim wall. If the upstairs is only 8 tefachim high, so it's not a separate reshus, and therefore you can furthermore. What difference does it make? In the gateway, you've got no separate reshus. If it's only 8 tefachim higher, even if you make a gateway, it's not a separate reshus. And it says more you've got two things combined together. That's the picture which they've got, and it's a nice picture. Is if you look at picture Shin Pei Vav, that's the most important picture. Well, what happens is like this. You've got an upstairs and a downstairs. The upstairs is only a little bit higher. Put it up, Shin Pei Vav. The upstairs is only less than 10 tefachim higher. So without the gate, if there'll be no gate, like in Shin Pei, there's no gate, it's all one reshus. Yeah, the problem was they never made the Eruv together. The people living on the upstairs did not make an Eruv with people downstairs. So therefore, if you don't have the gateway, it's all one reshus, nothing can help. But since they have a gateway, plus they have this doorway at the bottom of the stairs, so therefore it's two separate rishuyos. It's important to remember. You cannot carry from one garden to another garden unless you make an Eruv. To have an Eruv, there has to be an access point, which is proper access point, either a doorway or alternatively a ladder. If it's two rishuyos which are together, let's say the example is open up together, then it doesn't help. Then you have to actually consider it as one rishus. We talked about if my garden wall falls down between somebody else's garden wall, even if I won't be allowed to carry my garden anymore until we put up a new fence between. Right. Okay, we'll stop over here. So we'll have to run. A very good word.
Why?
Because there's a 9 o'clock program. Annex the two together.
All right.
Alex,
I think Alex is to cut.
Colonial.
Secede. When the Americans wanted to secede from England, what was the word for it? You never let British.
No, but if the annexation of land, you do take land.